Okay, the financing paragraph. So the financing paragraph is a little complicated, has a few moving parts, and I'll kind of walk you through those as clearly as I possibly can. So it starts by saying we're going to initial only one of the following subparagraphs. You've got paragraph A, you've got paragraph B, you've got paragraph C. So let's just start with A. This is a loan contingency. So it says that not later than 45 days after the date of acceptance or 5 business days prior to the date of closing. So if you wanted to close in 40 days, then you would have to have your mortgage commitment in 35. So the business, it's 5 business days or 45 days after the date of acceptance. And I should mention, in all of the cases in the contract, it calls for after the date. All of the dates say after the date of acceptance. So that means that the date of acceptance on the back of the contract, we'll see it when we get there, is not one of those dates that you count. So for example, if we sold the house on a Wednesday and everything was signed on a Wednesday, you start counting your days on Thursday. It doesn't make any difference whether the contract was signed at 9 o'clock in the morning or at 11:55 on Wednesday night. That Wednesday doesn't count. We start with that Thursday, so it's days after the date of acceptance. This does not say business days. This is calendar days. So if the contract does not say business days, it is calendar days. So this is 45 calendar days after the date of acceptance. Okay, and then it's 5 business days prior to the date of closing, but it's calendar days, okay, for the 45. So that's what we call our loan contingency date. The buyer has to provide written evidence from the lender that he has gotten a loan approval subject only to what's called at-close conditions. Meaning that he may have to show something at the closing, maybe, but whatever it is that he has to do, any matters of title survey, matters within the buyer's control. For a loan of, is he doing a fixed rate or an adjustable? Is it conventional? Is it FHA, VA, or USDA? That's United States Department of Agriculture. Not all of you are going to use the USDA, but some of you might. Hey, not all of you are going to use FHA and VA either. And then it says or other, some other type of loan for a percent of the purchase price. That's the LTV. So if the buyer's putting down 10%, it's a 90% of the purchase price, etc. Okay. It then goes on at line 62 to call for the interest rate and how long it's going to be amortized. So let's just say it was 5.5% interest rate loan amortized over 30 years. And then it goes on to say that the buyer is going to pay his own discount points, not to exceed whatever that might be, and he's going to pay all of his origination fees, et cetera, et cetera. The reason this is here is so that your buyer is stating, if I can't get this mortgage, if I can't get this 5.5% amortized over 30 years with paying 1% of the loan amount for my discount, my points, then I'm not buying this house. So this is to make sure that the buyer has some parameters around what his mortgage is going to be. Okay, so now I need to bring up this issue of what the interest rate is. So we're at line 62. If I write in there, for example, 5.5, and we are in a marketplace where the interest rates are going up, then as a listing agent, you ought to really take a hard look at that. Because if I have 5.5, and that's what it is today, and the interest rates are, and you have to pay attention to what's going on in the world. You cannot be in the real estate business and have blinders and earmuffs on and pay no attention to the fact that the Fed is talking about increasing the interest rates. Now, when the Fed increases the interest rates, it does not automatically mean tomorrow we're going to have an interest rate increase on real estate. It's two kind of different things, but it is a precursor to our interest rates going up as well. So if the interest rates went to 6 before the buyer got his mortgage, the buyer could walk away from your seller because this says 5.5. Do not be surprised, buyer agents, when the seller counters back and says 6%. Now, what that means is the buyer's still going to get a 5.5% mortgage if that's what's available. But if it went to 6, the buyer would still have to buy the house, but only if he qualified at 6. If he doesn't qualify, he still doesn't have to buy the house. But if he qualified, he'd still have to go through it. In a seller's market, I would suggest that you automatically put that in there as a buyer agent, because that way you're tilting the scales in favor of your buyer, because you're already putting in what we kind of call the fudge factor, if that's what happens. Okay, so that's if the buyer is getting financing. The next one, the next part of this financing is if the buyer, after he's applied for his loan, he can't get a loan approval and he serves notice to the seller not later than that loan contingency date, which was 45 days after the date of acceptance, then the contract is null and void. If he does not provide evidence that he has the mortgage, or does not ask, or even asks for an extension for his mortgage time, either one, the seller can kill the contract if they choose to kill the contract. So your buyer needs to have his mortgage by the date that's in there. So if he doesn't have his mortgage in 45 days, even if he asks for an extension, the seller does not have to grant it, and the seller can say no. Or if they don't even ask for an extension, the seller can kill the contract after that. Now, it goes on to say, so my buyer does not get his mortgage and it's day 45. He asks for an extension. Seller has not granted the extension. The seller and the seller's attorney is getting ready to send the letter to tell your buyer that, or the buyer, that the contract is now dead. So that's happening on day 46. And then on day 46, your buyer gets his mortgage commitment. If he can provide written evidence of his loan approval, then the contract's still in full force and effect if it is given prior to the notice to terminate. If the seller has already given the notice to terminate, then the contract is dead. Now, I'm going to try to do this without slanting it too much in any direction. Depending on the market, the seller may be more inclined to give an extension. So let's face it, if it's a buyer's market, the seller's probably going to give an extension. There's not a line of buyers outside waiting to buy this house. If you're in a seller's market, however, you need to be very aware of the fact that that seller could be sitting there with a backup contract. And that backup contract could be better for the seller than your buyer's contract. And this is a perfect way for your buyer to end up losing a house if he can't get his mortgage on time. So you need to impress upon your buyer that he needs to move this mortgage forward as quickly as possible, which means you need to know whether or not the buyer needs to bring in a W-2. Does he need to bring in his divorce papers? Does he need to bring in his DD-214 if he is a vet? What is it that he needs to give to the lender to make sure that this thing is moving forward? Okay, so then we need to make sure the buyer does his mortgage application on time, because if he doesn't, there's no way he's going to get this mortgage in 45 days. So what this contract calls for is that the buyer must do his mortgage application, his loan application, and pay all of the fees that are required for the application to move forward and the appraisal to be performed. And he has to do that within 10 business days after the date of acceptance. And if he does not do that, and the seller, listing agent, seller's attorney, etc., has the right to ask for proof that that has been done. If he has not done that, then the seller again can terminate the contract. They only have 5 business days to 5 business days thereafter, or any extension thereof agreed to by the parties in writing, meaning they got 5 days to kill it. But they can, if he doesn't do his mortgage application on time. Could he ask for more time for his mortgage application? Yes, and that's what that referred to about the extensions on line 74. Why would the buyer do that? The 10 days after date of acceptance basically ties in with that 10 business days for getting the AI satisfied. If for some reason we're still fighting over the attorney review and home inspection issues, and we're beyond that 10 business days, there's a possibility that the attorney is going to ask for an extension to do his mortgage application, because if we can't get the issue of the home inspection issues satisfied, then why have the buyer pay another $400 or $500 for his application? So that's why it's all tied in together, and that's why there might be an extension, okay? So then it goes on to say, any party causing a delay in the loan approval process does not have the right to terminate under the subparagraph, and really this is aimed more at the sellers. If the sellers, for example, were refusing to allow the buyer's the lender's appraiser to come in and look at the property, didn't allow the home inspector to come in or whatever, they're causing the delay. They would not then have the right to terminate. And it goes on to say that in the event neither party elects to declare the contract terminated on any of these issues, contracts in full force and effect, okay, with without any loan contingencies. So unless the buyer is provided in paragraph 30 that this contract is contingent upon the sale or closing of his existing real estate, the buyer, it is not contingent on the closing or the sale of his real estate. We'll get to paragraph 30 in a little while, but paragraph 30 is the paragraph that you can use on this contract so that if your buyer has a home to sell and close, or a home that he just can't buy this house without his closing, even though he already has a contract on it. So if he did not use paragraph 30 and his mortgage commitment came back and his loan approval came back and said that you have a loan contingent on the sale of your house, then he'd better figure out how he's going to show up at a closing, because he could lose his earnest money now. Because it says right in here, if you've got a home to sell and you need to make it contingent on that, then you need to come forward and say so. Because if you don't, then the contract is not contingent on that. So the rest of it says that it just talks about buyer is deemed to have satisfied financing conditions if buyer obtains a loan approval in accordance with the terms, even though the loan is conditioned on the sale and or closing of buyer's exit. I already mentioned that. So if the buyer is going FHA, VA, or USDA financing, the required amendments and disclosures need to be attached to this contract. We will make sure that they are attached. Those are additional items that you will get from the lender if you are going FHA, VA, or USDA, okay? All right, so now this, it says also that, excuse me, if it's VA, the funding fee, or if FHA, the mortgage insurance premium is paid by the buyer. This is just to make sure that the buyer understands that those two fees are not going to be pushed off onto the seller. Okay. So paragraph B is, so you chose A if your buyer wants a mortgage contingency. That means he is not going to buy this house if he cannot get a mortgage. So the next one, option C, is he's going to pay cash. So with option C, what he is saying is that I've got the cash to be able to make this transaction happen. And if you take a look at like line 86, it says the buyer has sufficient funds available to satisfy the provisions of this subparagraph. Buyer agrees to verify the above representation. So he has to show to the seller that he has the cash. So if he's buying a $400,000 house, what he is saying here is, I've got the cash. Here's my proof of funds. And what is a proof of funds? It depends on what the seller or the seller's attorney or the listing agent wants to see. The attorney's not even involved yet. So it's going to be the listing agent or the seller. I'll give you a heads up. In most cases, it is going to be a copy of his bank statement, all of the account numbers taken off of it, showing that he has $400,000 in there. So because we've been duped in the past by people saying they have $400,000 and it's a letter, but it turns out to not be true. So they're going to want to see proof of funds. Now, neither B nor C, because B is a cash transaction with a mortgage, that neither of them require an appraisal. Neither of these two, B or C, are contingent on the property appraising out. Most buyers who are going with one of these two options are not concerned about this property appraising. The minute you put in there that the property must appraise, and as I mentioned before, we cannot write anything into this contract, but the buyers and sellers can write any darn thing they want to. So can my buyer write in, even though he's going cash, that property must appraise for purchase price, he might as well be going and getting a mortgage now, guys, because bottom line is he's weakened his cash transaction to that of now it's got to appraise. We see people going with cash, no mortgage at all, more often in very high price ranges, or investors who are cash and they know what the value is. Most people going with cash are not concerned about whether or not it's going to appraise out. Just kind of who it is that's using that type of financing. So, or non-financing as the case may be. So it goes on to say that the parties are going to share the title company escrow closing fee equally. So in a cash transaction, the buyer and the seller are going to share the escrow closing fee. So when you are doing your estimate of expenses for your seller or your, excuse me, when you're doing the estimate of expenses for your seller or buyer, you're going to want to factor that in. Okay. All right. So now cash transactions, mortgage allowed. This one means that my buyer, and typically these buyers are very, very strong buyers. You're looking at people with credit scores of 850. You're looking at people who know they're going to get their mortgage, but still want to get a mortgage. So it's not contingent on the buyer getting financing, but he's saying that he might. So what we need to do with this one is we need to make sure that the seller knows there will still be, that we still may have an appraiser coming in, because in order to get the mortgage, the appraiser has to look at the property, but the buyer needs to understand that it's not contingent on that. So if the buyer, although most of these buyers are putting down a hefty down payment, it's not that big a deal, for them, but this is a cash transaction, they're going to get a mortgage, and it's not contingent on it appraising. But the appraiser is still going to come through the property. And it goes on to say in this one that the buyer is going to pay the title company escrow closing fee if he gets a mortgage. But if he closes without a mortgage, the parties are going to share in the title escrow closing fee because that's what they would have done if it was a cash sale. Okay, so those are your financing options. All right, so it's either A, it's mortgage, it's contingent on getting a mortgage. B, it's a cash transaction, no mortgage allowed. Or C, it's a cash transaction with the buyer possibly getting a mortgage. So the next paragraph, paragraph 8, is about the disclosures. So prior to signing the contract, all we want to know here, has the buyer received or not received his residential real property disclosure, the lead disclosure, the lead pamphlet? Has he gotten his radon guide? Has that been disclosed? And the lead paint and the lead-based paint. The residential real property disclosure form is needed on the vast majority of transactions you will be involved with. On the rare occasion that that form is not going to be given, I would rather you not just check has not received, because then you're going to have people looking for something that doesn't exist. The suggestion has been made to do one of two things. And I would suggest you leave it in, do not draw a line through it and have the buyer and seller initial it, because that still doesn't say anything. I don't think. So I'm just going to suggest that where it says has or has not received, that you put NA in the blank that says has not received. In other words, what we're saying is don't check it, because had not received, you could get the attorneys looking for something. So put NA in there. Do the same thing with lead. If the property is on the 3rd floor or higher, there is no lead paint disclosure. So no, they will not have received that. If the property was built after 1978, there is no radon. Lead paint. So they would not have received that. So you've got the radon that's going differently. You've got the lead paint that might not be there. So if it's not there, put NA in there. A lot of people I have seen will put not applicable at the end after each one. in most of your transactions, you will have check marks in there as to whether or not you got it or you did not get it prior to the prior to the signing of the contract. Most of the time, by the way, you're going to find those in the MLS in the additional information pages, okay? This is the prorations paragraph. And what this is basically saying, without me going through every darn line of it, is this: that there are some things that the sellers have already paid. For example, real estate taxes, there's rents, there's any kind of association fees, pre-purchase fuel, etc. So if I've already purchased that, then I have to credit that to the buyers, okay? And the biggest two issues are the general real estate taxes are prorated, and they include the day of closing based on some blank percentage of the most recent ascertainable tax bill. So I'm again going to say you need to talk to your managing brokers about this, because in many marketplaces, we just put 105% in there, presuming that the taxes will go up 5% higher than they were last year, because we do taxes in arrears in the state of Illinois, and that means we don't have a new tax bill for the current year in most cases. So in some cases, we've seen those have to be prorated at 110 and 115%, depending on some special circumstances, okay? B is whether there's a homeowners or condo association. And there's two lines there, because sometimes we have two homeowners associations. And we're saying that the homeowners association fees are, let's just say $200 a month. And the umbrella, so there's the one homeowners association for this complex, and then there's the one for the whole subdivision, and that's another $100 a year. Whatever it is, the seller is going to pay the remaining balance of any special assessments by the association confirmed prior to the date of acceptance, and they're disclosing what the association fees are so that they know what they are, and those two will be prorated. So the last part of that, which goes on to the next page, speaks to any special assessment area or special service area due after the year of closing. Those are not proratable items. They're going to be paid by the buyer, unless somehow or another the ordinance or statute says they should be paid. Special assessment areas or special service areas are not the same as a special assessment put onto the property by a homeowners association. So a special assessment area, or usually called SSAs, those are special taxes that were put onto the property over and above the real estate taxes that flow with the property, no matter who owns it. It's a mandatory disclosure in the MLS. You will know, and I'm going to show you another place where the seller has to disclose whether or not it's in an SSA. All right, so because that's more money that the buyer has to pay after he's bought the house, over and above what his real estate taxes are.